foundations. Maybe you got training in a formal academic program in philanthropy or in nonprofit management, or perhaps you just worked at a nonprofit for a number of years before making the switch. But no matter what path you took into grant making, it's important to keep front and center the notion that it really is a privilege to do this type of work and to steward funds and to be able to make decisions for the benefit of others. Keeping first and foremost in your mind that it's not your money, and you're not the one doing the toughest work. It certainly is very challenging to give away money well, but at foundations, overall, the stakes are lower. There are fewer folks that we're accountable to, and we really don't live with the same types of existential worries that many of our grantees do. The folks that are staying up at night wondering if their grant's going to be awarded, how are they going to keep the lights on, how are they going to make payroll or meet their clients' needs. That is a very stressful, all-consuming job, and we need to keep those struggles of our nonprofit partners sort of front and center and remember that it's a privilege to be able to serve them. And part of that has to do with staying open and connected to the community that we serve. It's important to not allow yourself to sort of be walled up as a foundation fortress, to provide good customer service, to remain accessible and open to new ideas, new people, and new introductions that might strengthen the work.
All right, thanks, Caroline. So this is Helen, and I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today. I think we have put our heads together and tried to come up with some lessons that are really personal to us. Granted, we've missed a few since we only have 10 of these lessons, but we hope you'll bear with us and sort of walk this journey with us as we go through the next few minutes. I've been at the foundation here about 2.5 years, and so this particular lesson about understanding your foundation's culture is one that I can really speak to. I think coming into a new environment, you always, no matter where you are, have to be very clear about the fact that each situation is unique. The people who work there, the norms and behaviors that are there, the language and the patterns that have evolved over time at that particular institution or organization are important to how you do your work. There are going to be assumptions, there are going to be habits in place that are really critical for you to pay attention to, and not just come in comparing it to where you've been in the past and thinking that your new setting is greater than or less than. But it's important to do a mental reset and really understand what it is that, what's happening there. Who runs point for the important tasks? Who do you go to for the stapler? And who do you go to for strategic advice? Because there are people who play those roles in every setting. And I think it's important, speaking of roles, to make sure that you acknowledge the important role that every single person in the foundation plays, whether it's grants management, HR, finance, investment, your grants staff who are making the program decisions, your board, your executive office, whatever those departments are that you have in your foundation are occupied by people who have important things to say and who have important experience to bring to bear. So make sure that everybody who's a part of that machine is part of how you do your work.
Great. So lesson number 3 is about content expertise. And I really think it's been important on the job to find your passion and develop expertise in something. And I'm a big believer that it doesn't actually even matter too much exactly what this expertise in. It's really about becoming the go-to person for something either within your office, within your foundation, or within the field. I've always heard really good job advice from others that a way to be successful in your job is to really make yourself indispensable. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, try to be that irreplaceable person who is the go-to for something specific. And even folks that, for example, work at a community foundation and may work on issues as varied as health and human services and education, you can still be a generalist, but going deep into some area of content I think really pays dividends and helps you, especially as you're starting out, sort of build stature and a reputation in the field. One of the things I really love about grant making is that professional success requires a mix of 2 different types of skills. One are the grant-making skills, sort of the nuts and bolts of philanthropy, its history, the ethics that go along with that, the processes, how to think strategically. These are skills you can learn on the job. You can learn them through professional development and training, like the grant-making school courses that the Johnson Center offers. But then the second big bucket of skills is specific to content expertise. So you don't need to be an expert in everything, but it is important to be knowledgeable enough to be able to ask good questions and make good decisions about the funds that you are stewarding. And part of that is to just be in learning mode all the time. Stay curious, keep learning, invest in yourself and your own knowledge development. And this can be tough to spend time to really focus on yourself, especially when we're all so busy in your jobs. It can feel like something extra or a burden to keep up with your field, read periodicals and journals, staying familiar with online platforms, attending webinars, which is what you all are doing right now, and also really participating in networking meetings and informational interviews that are always helping you seek to develop additional relationships and content knowledge that will be helpful in your work. And it is important to build that strong network as part of that. You can't be an expert in everything, but you should have lifelines that you can call to find expertise when you need it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to move on to lesson 4, which is sit at the table. I couldn't be more adamant about the importance of this. I think sitting around the periphery of conversations means that you don't care enough to get involved. And sitting at the table, whether it's really sitting at the table literally or just being fully present for conversations, is important when you participate in a large foundation conversation or a field conversation. And I would say that it's important to stay present while you're participating. I think in this digital age we're all pretty guilty of pulling out our phones or our laptops or our iPads or whatever it is and checking email during meetings. Don't do that. Stay present, because inevitably when you're doing the multitasking you're going to miss something. And if you're not just missing something, maybe you're an excellent multitasker, the person who's talking at the time where you're checking your email is going to think that you don't care about what it is that they have to say. So be present. And the reality is, last week I had an experience that made me really think hard about being present and staying present in meetings. I was listening to a speaker that made me want to check out immediately. The things that this speaker was saying I found to be slightly offensive. And the first thing I wanted to do was reach for my phone and check my email and just mentally check out. And afterwards, a colleague said to me and to another group of people, I think one of the things that's so important to keep in mind is that everyone who's saying something has a nugget in there somewhere that you can pull out of what they're saying, but you have to be present to do that. And I think that that was a real takeaway for me. And so I'm still working on that one. I'm not going to say that I don't have to do a mirror check every once in a while. But I also think that while you're at the table, you have to believe in what you're bringing there. You have to believe in your own expertise, your own experience. You have to know yourself, know what your assets are and how it is that you can leverage those in a conversation and to bring to bear the experience that you have. And another point that I think is critically important is staying there when the conversation gets tough. One of the privileges that we have working in foundations is to be able to address some pretty tough societal issues. We're not going to solve these in the short term, but we need to stay in the room and participate fully in the conversation with our colleagues, with experts in the field, and with people on the ground who are part of these communities, because it's important that we are there and we understand what they're dealing with, what's going on, and how we can participate fully in that conversation.
Great. Lesson number 5 is about collaboration, and we can think about this sort of externally and internally. So when you talk about partnership building, there is an old adage that if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. All of us who work in foundations, we're working on complex social change issues that are not easy to solve, or they would have been solved already. And it's important to keep in mind that this work was happening before we started at our foundation jobs, and it will be ongoing after we leave. So keeping that notion of humility and our role within a larger ecosystem of social change front and center, I think is really important. These types of partnerships that can be built in grant-making, especially when we as foundations sit in an often privileged role of being a neutral convener, are really critical to tackling these big types of social change issues that just can't be solved with one sector. Collaboration overall has a number of technical skills that can go along with it, sort of formally learning how to collaborate. We could think about the collective impact frame, Over the past couple of years, it's become a very popular way of working that has sort of an academic background to it. You can learn how to do that. But then there are also a lot of soft social skills that go along with collaboration. Being a good listener, being patient, flexible, responsive, really taking time to invest in building relationships. And this can be tough to do. Money and time are in short supply. It's easy to hunker down and really just focus on what you have control of in your own work, but it will certainly enrich your work if you collaborate, and it will make it more likely that you'll contribute to making lasting social change. And through all of this, I can't underscore enough, with collaboration, it's about having the people skills and the orientation to do it. There are negotiation skills involved, there are mediation skills involved. It's a lot easier to work on your own than it is to work with other partners at the table, but it really will pay off if done well.
Thanks, Caroline. I think lesson number 6 about being creative and adaptive is a really nice segue from the collaboration slide, because you don't need to be as creative and adaptive if you're just working alone. I think that you need to be flexible when you're working with other people, because it's not your way or the highway. It's really about thinking, what are the needs of this other person? How is it that I can be responsive to that? My mom used to always say, don't react, respond. And I think she was right, because it really is about figuring out what you need to do, how you can change, how you can adapt, in order, and not sacrificing the integrity of what you're doing, but being flexible. I've worked in nonprofits for about 15 years before coming to Kresge, and I will tell you that while I don't advocate for sending emails at midnight, I will tell you that I think that more often than not, we're not working a 9-to-5 job, and I think that there are times where you do need to respond quickly, and sometimes it's easy to just fire off an email or just get the job done in the time that you're given, whether it's at work or somewhere else. And again, I don't know that the HR department would advocate for me saying that, but I think that you have integrity in what you do, and you need to make sure that you exercise that. I think also being creative to shape a grant so that it accomplishes your foundation's goals, your objectives, and also benefits your grant partner is a really important thing to think about. Caroline mentioned that we're in a privileged position, and being aware of that is important. There is a power dynamic when you're in a grant-making role, and to be sensitive to that, because that's not something that you need to exercise any more fully than is already there. But it's about relationships, right? Grant-making is ultimately about building relationships, unless you just want to do transactional grant-making, but I don't think that's what most of us are about. I think most of us want to do transformational grant-making. And they take time. Those kinds of grants take time to build. Relationships take time to build. And something that really, really hits home with me is there's more than one right answer. We're not searching to get something correct. I think as grant makers, we're really looking to have a variety of perspectives. And sometimes you've got to be okay with failing. You've got to be prepared for that. If you're going to take a risk and do something big and bold, it might fail. So be prepared to fail, but fail fast. Get back up. Write about it. Don't forget to be contemplative about the work and thoughtful about the work, and then try again.
Great. So lesson number 7 is about constructive feedback, and this also ties back with not walling yourself off into a foundation fortress, but really trying to be open, responsive, accessible, seeking out feedback, and asking for help and advice. It can also be hard to make time for this. Many of our foundations are actually very understaffed in much the same way that our grantee partner organizations are understaffed. So it can be easy to stay in that bubble, but it is important to look externally and try to find out, how are you fitting in the ecosystem? What relationships do you have? How are they impacting others? How is the way you go about your job either helping or hurting getting the work done? So looking for fellowships or coaching opportunities. There are many affinity groups in our field, like ABFI, the Association of Black Foundation Executives, that has a coaching initiative. EPIP, the Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy group, also does coaching. Seek out those opportunities that do exist to focus on your own practice as a grant maker and how you can improve. This also involves seeking out formal and informal mentoring relationships. I think all of us would really hope that if we picked up the phone and called somebody else in the grant-making field, that he or she would be responsive to us and would be willing to share some wisdom or help out with a strategic question we might be struggling with. And so it's important not only to be the one reaching out, but to be open and accessible when other people reach out to you, especially for younger people in the field who may want to meet with you, learn from your experience, really sort of paying it forward to the folks coming up in the ranks behind us is equally important. You can get a lot of good constructive feedback also with more formal tools. The Center for Effective Philanthropy, which is at the website effectivephilanthropy.org, they offer a number of different types of foundation assessments. Some of them are focused on the foundation's own internal culture, so that would be tools like the Staff Perception Report. And then some of them are more externally focused, like the Grantee Perception Report, where you can get feedback from grantees about what they think about the foundation and their strategies, how responsive their program officers are to them, does the program officers help them solve problems. You can get a lot of great feedback from those types of channels and hopefully feel empowered to be a champion within your foundation for making changes based on the types of feedback you're getting.
So lesson number 8 is called Learning and Evaluation. It could have just as easily been called Stewardship because, as Caroline mentioned earlier, we are stewarding someone else's money as we make these decisions. So it's important to understand why we're here. I think most of us come to this field because we believe in the mission of the foundation that we're working for. Here at Kresge, our mission is expanding opportunity for low-income people in America's cities, and that's really our North Star. We have 6 different program teams here at Kresge, from arts and culture to higher education to environment, health, human services, and community development. And while each of those particular priorities and program teams have a unique and elegant strategy about how to approach their field and the work that they do, each of them is really trying to align with that overarching vision for the foundation. And each team has clear objectives that they're trying to accomplish. Knowing what those goals are helps inform your grant making and inform your conversations with potential grant partners and existing grant partners. And it's important to understand what the barriers are to change as well as what the problem is, understanding what interim outcomes you're looking for as well as what long-term outcomes you're hoping to accomplish, and what kind of goals you'd like to ultimately have. Those types of goals and objectives end up informing how you even bring information back into the foundation. You know, a lot of what we're looking at here requires not just quantitative data, but qualitative data and storytelling. Don't get stuck on one type or method of sharing information because you're going to need to really put a personality with the data, and the data is going to need to stand on its own as well. You know, we've been getting into learning and evaluation here at the foundation, and I can tell you that while I'm no evaluation expert, I've learned a lot from the conversations that we've had, and understanding that there are so many methods in play, from the summative evaluation that we all are pretty familiar with, let's measure how this grant worked, what happened at the end of it, to really understanding what developmental evaluation is, which is one that supports innovation, which is something that I'm particularly interested in, so I'll share that. Developmental evaluation supports innovation by bringing data to inform and guide ongoing decision making as part of the development process. You know, I think also while you're doing this, you're gauging what's going on, but you're also bringing to bear the experience that you bring to that situation. How are you using that experience that you've gained in the field, whether it's through conversations or work that you've done, bringing that to bear on the decisions that you've made? And I won't go into the developing a learning orientation, but I think, because I think Caroline did that, but I will say that I don't think anything else is more critical. Because if you get stuck, you're going to keep doing what you've always done, and you're not going to be able to contribute to an ongoing conversation about really serious issues that are going on in the world. We need to have a learning orientation in order to be successful at making strategic and important decisions.
Great points, Helen. Lesson number 9 is about fundraising. So I know some people on the phone may already be in grant making, and maybe like me, you actually used to be in fundraising long ago, and that was part of your career path that led you to grant making. There might also be some folks on the line who currently are fundraisers, work within nonprofits, raising money to achieve the organization's mission, and are maybe interested in making a career switch to grant making. But no matter where you stand on this, or if you've never done any formal fundraising, probably all of us have some experience with fundraising. This could be because we used to work at a nonprofit, and even if that wasn't directly our role, everybody in nonprofits often gets pulled into some type of fundraising activities. It could be because we have sat on boards that have, fiduciary and fundraising responsibilities that go along with that. And I think all of this can actually be great preparation for grant making. Even if you don't have any formal fundraising experience, the principles of fundraising I have found to be really useful within grant making. A lot of this has to do with the notion of persuasion and making the case. So when you're working with somebody and shaping up the idea for a grant, you really have to figure out how to serve as an advocate for that organization and that work within your organization. And that means you need to be able to very clearly articulate the value proposition of that organization and what it's trying to accomplish, and make the case about why they are worthy for support. And that has to do with your own internal culture. That might mean making the case to your executive team or to your president or to your board or your donor, however your foundation is structured. But that notion of crafting a compelling argument, being ready to answer questions about it, anticipating questions you're going to get in advance about it, and doing the sales job for the work is all actually very valuable in the day-to-day work of grant making. CEP, which we talked about earlier, the Center for Effective Philanthropy, they have a report that came out many years ago, and it's called Beyond the Grant Check. And it is a report based on surveys that they did with nonprofit organizations to find out what types of services grantees really value that their program officers provide to them beyond the grant check, so beyond the actual dollars that are awarded. And probably not too surprisingly, what they found out is that grantees really value their foundation program officers helping open the doors for them to other foundations. So foundations can be really walled off. It can be hard to get anybody to answer a phone call. It can be hard to find people's email addresses online. And so helping create that personal connection for your grantees and make introductions to them to other foundations can be really a great gift. And it also helps you as the program officer leverage additional funds for work that you believe is important. I have really been surprised in grant making how much of my time over the past decade has been taken up doing what I would really consider fundraising, sort of that case making and helping connect my grantees with other sources of funds in the field.
Okay, so lesson number 10 is about communicating, and not just communicating, but communicating clearly. And I am going to pull from one of our peer foundation's blog posts that always comes to mind when I think about communication, and it's about clear writing at foundations. And I would really encourage you to go to the Knight Foundation blog. Just look up Knight Foundation blog and then look up Three Little Pigs, and you'll know why in a minute. So what they say in one of the third paragraphs is too often we fall into the trap of believing that complex communication equals intelligence. Fancy words mean you're smart. Simple words mean you're dumb. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this transpire. But then they go into saying, okay, so we all know the three blind mice. This is really clear. Three blind mice, see how they run, see how they run. They all run after the farmer's wife who cut off their tails with a carving knife. Have you ever seen such a sight in your life as three blind mice? But if a foundation wrote that, it might sound something like this. Three rodents with defective visual perception, three rodents with defective visual perception. Visualize how they perambulate. Visualize how they perambulate. They all perambulated after the agricultural spouse who severed their appendages with a kitchen utensil. Have you ever visualized such a spectacle in your existence as three rodents with defective visual perception? Now, the reality is I didn't sound any smarter saying the second one than I did the first original version. But we do fall into that trap of thinking that if we throw in jargon, it will make us sound as though we have more education or more experience. But the reality is that's not true, because jargon is just frustrating. And while I think earlier I said know your foundation, understand your foundation's voice, it's important to not get caught up in jargon that you may use internally when you're talking to people externally. Know how people inside the walls of your inside of your foundation communicate, but also understand that doesn't always translate out into the world. Make sure that you're clear, and make sure that you're efficient when you're talking too. Some advice that I heard recently that really resonated was, what are you going to say? Write it down and cut it in half. Now take that and cut that in half. and do it again. And end up with bullets that really articulate what your goal is for that conversation, a thesis statement, if you will, because that's going to help you be clear in articulating the problem that you're trying to solve and what it is that you've analyzed as a way to make a difference with the funding that you're about to exercise. I also think it's important to understand what your foundation really does stand for. What's your position on things? As we think about that here at Kresge, we really think about what is our position on opportunity. What does that mean to us? And when we speak to people out in the world, what do we say about that? What is our position? What is our perspective on that? But it's not just about speaking. Honestly, most of this job is about listening. It's really paying attention to what your grant partners have to say, what people who are working in the communities that you're working in have to say, and listening, and not just pretending to listen, but absorbing that and incorporating that into how you make your decisions. I think a lot of times we really think about how we make our funding decisions based on our knowledge of the field, right? And that happens because we understand what's going on because we've taken time to listen and acknowledge it. And speaking of listening and acknowledging things, I think Caroline indicated earlier that we would very much like to have a dialogue. And so we're going to pass the baton back to Megan because I think she's going to help field some questions, and we'd love to have that conversation with you.
Great. Thank you so much for all of this valuable information. I think regardless of our respective roles, we'll all take something away from this conversation. And I do have a few questions that came in that I want to get started with. The first question is, I feel like sometimes I send mixed signals to potential grantees by my interest in learning about their organization, but not necessarily committing to funding them. How do you handle accepting a meeting, but letting them know we may not end up giving them a grant?
That's a great question. This is Caroline, and that's certainly one I think that we all face quite a bit. You know, the notion of fielding in a tactful and courteous and responsive way requests for meetings, emails, unsolicited letters of inquiry and proposals. You know, this is a big part of the job of any program staff member at a foundation. I think, keeping front and center that it is a learning opportunity, hopefully for you both. So when I get these types of meeting requests, if something comes in over the transom, if it is completely in left field and there is no hope that we're ever going to work with this organization, let alone fund them, I'll just let people know that, thanks so much for reaching out, but I'll direct them to our website. Hopefully you have pretty clear grant guidelines online and say, as you can see, our health program does not fund X, or our education program is actually focused on higher education as opposed to early childhood education. So something that just politely but firmly lets them know. If they are sort of in your orbit and you do legitimately think that you could learn from them, or let's say you're in a community foundation and you're going to run into this person at the grocery store anyway, and you have a foundation culture that you respond to all of these types of requests, I think putting in writing up front the fact when you respond to them that it's very unlikely that they will be funded, but you would be happy to meet and set the time and date and do it on the phone or in person. I think creating a paper trail that makes it clear from the beginning that it's very unlikely is helpful. Just get that down in writing, but then go in, as Helen said, go in as a good listener with your ears open. Be willing to share your own expertise, learn from them, and obviously thank them for their time and make it clear that you're always open to hearing about interesting things going on in the field, innovations. You're looking for new ways to serve people in need better, and so hopefully it can be a great learning experience on both ends. Even if it doesn't result in funding, it might result in a new connection, an introduction, or just some information sharing.
Thank you. Our next question is about your point about needing good negotiation and mediation skills to collaborate. They're looking for any suggestions or resources to help someone new in the field begin to develop these, such as training, resources, tips, or other ideas you may have.
Yeah, so I'll take a little crack at that. This is Helen, and invite Caroline to jump in as well. But I think one of the important qualities in this is understanding that there are a spectrum of personality types at play when you're beginning these types of negotiations, and understanding that you probably see things one way and someone else may well see it a completely opposite way. I think I learned early on that you can walk out of a room thinking that you've had a really clear conversation with someone about something, and they will walk out of that same room having a very different perspective on what actually transpired in the room. So it's important to make sure that you do write things down. I think sometimes that may mean an MOU. In our case, I think it often means a grant agreement, right? And there is a negotiation process often with your nonprofit partners as you're going through the grant process, figuring out what it is that you can agree upon as your objectives and your outcomes, writing it down and making sure that there's real clarity around that. I think it's also important to, if you think about trainings, there are a lot of trainings, and I just came off of one actually, so I'll share it with you. It was an American Express Leadership Academy that I went to recently where we really dug into a lot of different tools that you can use to negotiate situations, right? There are specific ways that you can do that. I think we often fall into the trap of saying, you said this, or this is what you're doing. When the reality is what we need to do is say, this is the situation, this is the behavior that I noticed, and this is the impact that it's having on our conversation, on the work, et cetera, but to be as objective as possible in that, because ultimately this is all subjective work. We are trying to be objective and pulling in the tools, as many tools as you can, to allow you to maintain an objective perspective is a really critical part of being successful in those negotiations, that and writing it down.
This is Caroline. The only one other tip I would add here is it's a whole field of self-help books around negotiation and mediation skills. One of the most famous ones is called Getting to Yes, and it's used in a lot of different mediation courses. My husband is a trained legal mediator, and once he read this book, he basically became insufferable to live with because I always felt like he was trying to negotiate everything. He became much better at arguing. But even though that one is more focused sort of in corporate negotiation settings, I think there's actually some good nuggets of wisdom in there about, as Helen said, how do you objectively lay out both sides and really work towards finding common ground and solutions that both sides can be happy with.
Great, thank you both. Another question we had come in is, how would you recommend someone begin a career in grant making if they are on the periphery or in a nonprofit right now?
Well, that's something that we could probably both speak to, but I can say that because I came out of a background of working on the ground for 15 years, there were a number of things that contributed to my interest in working with philanthropy. I think I found myself working with philanthropic dollars, much as Caroline had mentioned, that sort of fundraising element of working with foundations and becoming articulate in what it meant to be able to discuss the types of outcomes and the types of funds that created those outcomes was important even then to being able to re-grant in small situations that led me to think there's something really, really compelling here. I personally think, too, that being an expert in what you do allows you to gain potentially a larger platform that gets you into bigger conversations, right? So being able to speak clearly about your work and about what you've learned along the way can potentially lead to opportunities to interface with a number of folks from the philanthropic world. Learning how to get involved in those conversations because of your expertise is important. So whether it's as a consultant or a volunteer or participating somehow in a convening or a panel discussion, those are opportunities I think that allow you to begin to network and to begin to learn a little bit more about the world of philanthropy. If you've been at one foundation, you know one foundation. So we can't tell you how to get into, sort of foundations writ large, but there are opportunities even to begin to think about your own personal philanthropy, I think, that are helpful. We are working off of a platform today called Learn Philanthropy that does offer some incredible access to tools. All of the information on the site has been vetted through a number of different people who are in the world of philanthropy, and really with the specific intent to open that door and to make it clear how you can get involved, how you can build your skills once you're there. So I think taking advantage of the work that's available on the website is important. And I will tell you, I mentioned to somebody yesterday that the Giving Circles Fund is I think, a really incredible opportunity, or an example of an opportunity of how someone in a community can begin to think strategically and pull in tools and resources around philanthropic giving that their friends and they can utilize, whether it's in an informal circle, whether it's something that's happening in a business or a nonprofit organization. You can use the tools available on that website, and I think it's also linked to Learn Philanthropy, to develop a perspective on what it is that you want to do with your own dollars in a philanthropic way. So there are a number of different tools and opportunities and resources that are really easily within reach if you just spend a little bit of time hunting around for them.
And this is Caroline. Just one last sort of concrete tip I would add to this notion of getting into philanthropy, and I know we have folks on the line from all over, is to, if you are willing to move and be geographically flexible around the country, there are a lot of philanthropy jobs around the country, but they're not all necessarily just clustered in certain spots. So if you're applying for philanthropy jobs in New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles, those jobs, for the most part, are going to get a lot more applications than jobs here in Detroit, where Helen and I are based, for example, or in Omaha, or in a number of places around the country that have very rich philanthropic traditions, big foundations. We get great jobs available for people really who want to make change, but are not, they're a little bit off the beaten path for some folks. So if you're willing to broaden your scope and being willing to move for work, I think it can open up a lot of different types of job opportunities.
Really good point.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So we've got one about mentorship. And they want to know if you've partnered formally with a mentor, and how did you go about establishing that relationship?
Well, this is Caroline. I'll start. I had never really had a formal mentoring relationship that I can think of where I said, this person is my mentor, and I went to somebody and said, will you be my mentor? And they said, yes, I will dispense my wisdom on you, and you will be my mentee. I've just never been in that type of formal relationship, but I know a lot of people that have and have really benefited from having that type of relationship. I have been very lucky to have lots of great people to learn from in all of the jobs that I have been in, and I've actually left jobs because I didn't think I was getting enough mentorship opportunities there. And so, I'm a big believer that if you don't have that type of formal one-on-one arrangement, or that doesn't fit for you, it's really about building a strong network of people all over who you trust, who have different degrees of experience, who work in different areas, who you can draw on when you are wrestling with an issue. You need strategic advice. You need somebody sort of outside of your own foundation who can take a look at your situation with a fresh, maybe more objective pair of eyes, and be willing to weigh in and to be that supportive voice to help you think things through. So I think there are lots of ways to go about getting mentorship, and just want to reiterate what I mentioned earlier too, that it's also about serving as a mentor, whether that's folks who are new within your organization, or to younger people, or to graduate students who reach out to you and are looking to see how they can get a foothold in the field. It's really realizing you're part of a spectrum of people who are seeking and giving help and support to others personally and professionally.
I'll just weigh in with a couple thoughts. The first one is ask. Ask the question, because it's so easy to just assume that you don't have time for that. And unless you reach out with intentionality and ask 1, 2, 5 people, whoever it is that you feel like has something to gain or that you can gain something from, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think these things are accidental. Every once in a while we're going to get lucky and fall into a relationship where we just grow and they help us shepherd ideas and guide our thoughts. But the reality is that there does have to be an intentionality around that, and you have to make time for it. So ask the question and set aside the time. Realize that there is an important transaction that takes place between you and someone who's willing to spend a little bit of time thinking things through with you, helping guide some of your decision making. But it has to happen regularly, and it has to happen on your calendar. So block the time on your calendar and ask the question.
Thank you both so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. We are about out of time, so I'm just going to wrap this up really quickly. For those of you who are still listening, please visit learnphilanthropy.org for more tools and information. We've got a really great expert Q&A section with more advice like this, and we're constantly adding new Q&As to that. We've also got a great directory of the field that will give you more information on organizations that can help you along your journey as a grant maker. We have an upcoming webinar if you'd like to register for that. It's on the site. It's called How to Jumpstart Learning in Your Organization, and that will be with Tara Qualls, the author of the Talent Development Platform, due out in March, and Jean McCall, the Human Resource Director at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. That is under our events page. And if you would like to get in touch with us about what you've heard today, if you have any other burning questions you want answered, please don't hesitate to contact me. My name is Megan Murphy. I realized I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. I'm the program manager for Learn Philanthropy, and you can reach me at murphym1@gbsu.edu.
Megan, thanks so much.
Thank you both.
Everyone.